Welcome to the STR Data Lab.
Hello and welcome to the STR Data Lab. I'm Jamie Lane, Chief Economist at AirDNA, and I'm joined today by a really special guest. We have the world-renowned podcaster, consultant, hospitality operator, Simon Lehmann, the CEO and founder of AJL. Simon, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jamie. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, so we saw each other a few times in 2025 at the different conferences, most recently at DARM, where you emceed. Amazing job emceeing again. I love how you bring in all the different aspects of a lot of the different presenters and sort of try to get themes going across where it's not just all these different talking heads up on stage, but I try to get some through lines across all the different presenters, and was hoping, and one, maybe you could start with, who are you? What is AJL? And then we'll talk a bit further into just, and where is the industry at today that you know so well?
Yeah, great pleasure. Thank you very much for the flowers, Jamie. And this year, I had the great honor of co-moderating together with Tim Cafferty, which was a different format, and I thought it was a great idea. So we were able to attend different verticals or shows at the same time, which was awesome. So we really enjoyed it. And yeah, we're passionate about the industry. So I've been in the industry for 20 years. And if vacation homes could flow to my veins, they probably would. As we say in the airline industry, it's kerosene, and in the vacation rental, it's STR and vacation rentals and houses flowing to the veins. And I've been very passionate about it for 20 years. I've had different backgrounds, operating very large property management companies, been on several different boards. So I've seen the industry from different angles, and it's been a lot of fun to see the business, how it's elevated and the evolution it's had for the last 20 years, and see where we're at today, where we were in 1995 when I joined the STR industry.
I bet there's some listeners that are surprised to even hear that the industry is 20 years old, and others that don't know and the long history that the industry has. But given the long history and sort of the 2-decade purview that you've had in this industry, how do you describe, and maybe when an investor or private equity group of someone's sort of asking you, Simon, like, and what is the current state of the industry today? Are we in a very mature industry? Are we in a burgeoning sort of new industry? Is it transitioning? Is it something else entirely? How would you describe short-term rentals today?
Before I get there, just very quickly on context, I had the honor to run one of the largest property management companies in the world back in 2005, and that was founded in 1965 as a Swiss company. and funny enough, we already had 24,000 units in at that time. So just to put things into context, and it's been founded in 1965. So it's an industry that has well matured over time. I think today, I'm happy to say we're in a normalization phase. And when I talk to also investors, we're in a normalization phase. We're not in a downturn. But I think the industry is still misreading the signals that we're seeing right now. But I think we're in definitely a normalization phase right now. That's what I call 2026.
So you say misreading the signals. One, what are the signals that you see people reading, and how are they misreading them?
I think the biggest shift in general, it's not demand, it's expectation, right? And growth expectation, return expectation, and operational expectations have all reset, I think. And I think that's why I'm saying we're in a normalization phase. What surprised me most recently is, how resilient demand has been in many secondary and leisure-driven markets as well, right? And you're sitting on top of the data, so you know better than me. But funny enough, despite higher costs and tighter regulations, these markets have actually performed quite well. So that's another aspect that I've seen about this normalization. And maybe the third point that I would like to mention is the most misunderstood narrative right now in the STR space is STRs are struggling, right? And what's that actually happening is the average operators are struggling, and good operators are actually not at all.
Hmm. So, and is that how you square the narrative of, and we hear it from a lot of property managers around the world that their businesses are struggling, demand's harder and harder to come by, profits are even harder to come by in the industry. Yet there's these narratives of, I'm I'm saying a lot of these narratives, and demand for short-term rentals is higher than ever, and Airbnb's profits are stronger than ever. We see property management companies selling their companies for record multiples, and we just heard in 2025, and Away Day sort of and having a amazing exit. So, how do you sort of square these? And a lot of property managers sort of calling out how weak it is, and then others sort of screaming from the rooftops how great things actually are in the industry right now.
Yeah, great point. And I think that allows me to frame it in a way the following, to that point you've just raised. And I think that's the fundamental point that I meant about normalization and also these high valuations that I have alluded to. We've moved from an expansion story into a selection story. And you mentioned Away Days, you mentioned others. So who executes well and who doesn't? And I think that's where the differentiation is in seeing some of these very successful exit cases, but they need to be differentiated. That doesn't mean that's the benchmark for valuation for every operator out there, for every PMC within our industry. So I'm going back to say, hey, it's not about the expansion story anymore. It's about the selection story. And the selection is who executes well versus the ones who are not doing a good job. And that leads into technology, it leads into professionalization, optimization. And that means for me also is that professionalization doesn't mean equally scale.
So, and professionalization, and I've been in I've sort of moved from hotels into short-term rentals about 6 years ago. In hotels, there was never this sort of discussion of professionalization. It was like independent operators versus branded operators, but everyone was professional. And as a data guy, I find it almost impossible to define what is a professional versus non-professional operator in this industry. Do you have a definition that I can steal?
Yeah, that's a tough question. Having been here 20 years, and when I was asked first to join this industry, I was very careful in saying yes because I thought it's worse than a Tupperware industry, right? And or secondhand car dealership. And I think I would frame it this way: professionalization is about systems and discipline. That's what for me professionalization is. It's not about unit count. It's not about just growth in its own nature. It's about professionalization. It's about systems and discipline, and that's where we differentiate. When we see how people differentiate themselves and how some incredible companies have arisen that are super professional about their tech stack, about the disciplines, how they run their processes, et cetera, versus others. Because one thing we should never forget that the biggest challenge the STR industry has, next to many others, is that the entry barrier is super low. And therefore, you can call yourself professional, but at the end of the day, for me, discipline and systems in how you operate is what professionalism really makes out to be.
So, do you think the industry is getting more professional? So, and there's many measures like, and if you just look at and listings under management, and for someone that has operator that has 20 more listings, that share has been roughly flat 25% over the past 10 years. But then, and every year I hear and talking heads say like, oh, and the industry is going to get more professional. Like that's going to happen next year, and the next year. And then we also see, a ton of new investors and every year coming into this industry, maybe more and more of those investors starting using new systems, new technology, they're not just relying on single channels like Airbnb or Vrbo or Booking. They're using property management systems. They're using dynamic pricing systems. But and going back to the original question, do you see this industry actually getting more professional, or is it sort of staying the same over time?
No, I clearly believe that the industry is becoming more professional. This is not just hope. I think we see that on the horizon. I think an industry professionalizes better with tough market environments as well, because it will wash out some of the bad ones, the bad apples as well, because it was too easy to make a quick buck in this industry, especially post COVID, and investment properties, low cost of capital, and many other drivers that have seen massive supply growth, and then also pent up travel demand. It had seen a lot of demand, and that's why I said at the beginning we're in a normalization phase. So we're not going to see continuous growth. So while the market is more, let's call it maybe stagnating, this requires more professionalism to squeeze out more margin while distribution costs and tech stacks and everything else becomes more expensive. And therefore, the margin, we clearly see an ongoing margin compression in this industry. That margin compression will continue to be one of the biggest challenges. And this forces property managers who've been in this game to, professionalization for me is about, revenue management discipline. You talked about that, cost control, data literacy, for example, brand consistency, things like that, which we basically did not have to think about in the past because it was just happening on its own. And that's for that reason we said, yeah, we do it later, we do it later. But I think now we're at a very high sophistication level in terms of technology we can source, in terms of the education of the guests and the homeowners. You can't just tell them any stories anymore. Guests clearly have different type of expectations. In the past, a lot of guests who are now staying STR were sole hotel guests. So, and we will maybe talk about that as well, because at the end of the day, I'm not separating verticals between hotels and STRs anymore. We just need to deliver what the customer expects. And I think all these different points are forcing our industry to become more professional, because otherwise you won't be able to survive. And in a summary, one of the biggest takeaways I took away from DARM was, first of all, the attendance level was high, the quality of speakers and engagement was massive as well. So our takeaways were incredible at DARM, I thought. And interesting, I had the opportunity to speak to quite a number of property managers and talk about them, what is on their agenda for 2026. And it was not about growth, and just have a good time. It was about profitability, reduce churn, and understand cost on a unit level. That is something I have to say that in 20 years of being in this industry, I've never heard as a property manager saying this is my focus for 26.
No, that shows a lot of discipline, I would say, for a property manager to say that instead of I want to add another 100 units because to maybe one of your earlier points that there's this thought or notion that scaling, adding more units allows me to spread that fixed cost and sort of expand margins. But we've also seen that hasn't always been the case. Of maybe some of the largest operators have been some of the least profitable in terms of margin. So how do you sort of weigh those two different narratives of wanting to scale to help sort of counter the profit compression, or that there's some disadvantage in the short-term rental space of once you get too large, that has sort of negative effects?
Yeah, that's a very hard one. I mean, there can be more profitable businesses with 100 units versus somebody who has grown to 500 units and is doing a bad job. And one thing to the earlier question at the introduction is, my day job is not being a professional podcaster. We're actually a consulting firm that deals with property managers across the world in all different sizes, from 50 units to 30,000 units. So size doesn't really matter for our work. So we see a lot of different aspects within the industry, different sizes, and therefore different challenges in relation to growth. and everything else. And when I said, in summary, it's not about growth. Yes, of course it is. And I think we are an industry, we are forced to grow, right? But then for me, the word professional and scalable and profitable comes in to the equation as well. We shouldn't grow at all cost. We should have, it's like building a skyscraper. I mean, we can't build a skyscraper on sand. We need to build a skyscraper on a solid foundation to grow that business smartly, because otherwise it's going to fall over, or we have a tower in Pisa that eventually will fall down, right? And that's not what we want. So I think the narrative for me is still, we are in a way, with all the economical pressure that we have, raising cost of labor and regulatory issues and many other aspects, and owners becoming more educated, potentially cost of capital goes up. We are forced to grow, but we need to grow smart and therefore profitable. So I think it's a balancing act constantly for you to review where you're at with your supply. How does your supply perform on a unit level? I think that's something we're considerably missing in the industry. We're not focusing enough on a unit level. We look at more the entire portfolio. And I think that's a mistake as well. So growth doesn't mean it's bad, but it needs to be profitable and smart.
Do you think there's ever going to be a national or international brand in the short-term rental space besides the major OTAs?
Never.
Never.
I've been in this industry for 20 years. We've seen a lot of initiatives in many different forms with different companies in Europe and the United States. And I think overall, the fragmentation of this industry is not going away at large. We're seeing new models coming in, such as franchise, and we've seen a lot of consolidation models where either brands have been integrated and others have more successfully left brands alive. And I think they have been more successful. So I think we had enough stories out there that we can look at to learn from and be smarter about it to build the business. But I think building a consumer-facing global or even national brand in our industry, I don't think in my lifetime I'm going to see that. On the distribution side, and the role of OTA still needs to be defined, that they have managed to have very strong brands. But in terms of delivering STR as a national-facing brands, with some exceptions like in the UK, it's not going to happen. And why the UK? Because in the UK, these brands are significantly older. If you look at House Seasons, Cottages.com, Sykes Cottages, they've been around for 50, 60, 70, 100 years, right? And they see travelers in the third, fourth generation coming to stay with them. It's a domestic market, it's domestic supply, so demand and supply is very close, and the UK is not the size of the United States, and these brands have been extremely established. And some of these local UK brands, they still manage to do more than 80% direct demand, right? But across continents, and even global, I don't think that will happen even with a franchise model, because the action in the STR space, however long it takes, is still happening locally.
Yeah, and do you think this sort of push towards local ownership, local control, whether it's through franchise or even PE ownership, but keeping and sort of local control, is that a recipe that's going to work long term, or do you think we're still going to be searching for the right operating model? Or is it that just scaled operating models just really don't work in this industry at all, given the need for things to be so local that there's just not enough to be able to sort of centralize, sort of saving on cost there to make this work at any sort of national scale, even if you're not doing a national brand?
I think we have seen enough models to choose our favorites and learn from it and focus on that. I think it's a combination of all the above. And, I think one of the biggest key drivers is, next to many others, and you talk about operational model, and I don't want to go down into the weeds of the different operating models. I think for me, the nut that needs to be cracked is the incentivization, or the incentive of the local operator part of a larger scheme of things. And that naturally is already bringing you certain ingredients to the model. And that could be a franchise model where because, and this is, I mean, we've seen Interhome with, they have over 100 local offices. But to give you an example, with Interhome, for example, in the Swiss mountains, they still close between 12 and 2 for lunchtime, right? Because the manager who runs that office, he's not incentivized. He doesn't own a piece of the business. He doesn't see any of the upside. So it's more, it's the employee. And I think that's what we've seen with a lot of these consolidation plays, with Vacasa making over 100 acquisitions and others as well. If the local manager who holds the key to the business is not incentivized and part of the bigger scheme of things, it's becoming extremely challenging to scale this business across many different markets, next to unit density, next to operational efficiency, next to centralized, decentralized marketing and tech stack activities. There's many other aspects you need to take into consideration. But I think the incentive of the person who runs the destination, I think, is key for a success of these businesses.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So maybe transitioning a bit over to the tech side, because AirDNA, we are a tech company, been in the data space now for over 10 years. There is always new competition sort of popping up that we're sort of watching at. But the question I wanted to sort of ask you've been very AI forward, and this is now our first mention of AI, sort of sitting halfway.
Yeah, we've done well.
Halfway through the recording. But it feels like AI has just dramatically lowered the barrier to building software in our space. It's software in any space. Like a small team can now spin up very capable point solutions really quickly. And this industry, I feel like, has been an industry of point solutions. There is a software that does anything from noise monitoring to insurance to whatever you need, you can find a solution. But you've also seen these platforms rise, whether it's Guesty, Hostaway, where they're trying to build sort of all-in-one solutions. And yes, they connect with all the point solutions for now, but they also have their own version of every single point solution. So I could sort of build two different narratives that AI is going to lead to the rise of point solutions and they're going to maybe win, or that the sort of platforms are going to kill point solutions, and every single thing you're going to need is going to be offered by your PMS and it's going to be given to you at one low price. So maybe that's the tee up for the question of, where do you see the technology landscape today and AI's place in it? Yeah.
I think my headline on that, Jamie, is, from more tools, we will go to fewer tools that helps us to make better decisions. So I think in a nutshell, that is what's going to happen. Now, who's going to win that with the platforms you alluded to versus point solution? I think I'm absolutely convinced that we're seeing more consolidation in the STR tech landscape. It's definitely we're not going to see an influx of a lot of capital and investment in this space. I think we see more consolidation. And the tech stack is I think, going forward, to the point that you have raised also in regards to AI, is going to be simplified, absolutely simplified, and not expanded. I mean, what we have seen, we're counting more than 25 different sub-verticals within the STR space, right? And that is definitely going to disappear. Now, can a platform solution be best in all the categories? I doubt it. So I think that's where it's going to be interesting to see what is being centralized in an OS, let's call it an operating system, and what is still being sourced as specialized tools that you require depending what your needs are as a business, where your level of professionalization is, et cetera, et cetera. So I think operators are becoming much more intentional about tech. And I think that's an additional point to the point we have discussed earlier with professionalization as well. But the real fatigue with overlapping tools that don't talk to each other is imminent. That's the biggest issue, right? So these overlaps and these tech stacks that some of these property managers have, they have a lot of overlaps in their tech stack, which is extremely frustrating. And they still have manual processes in between. So for me, I think the smartest operators are not going to source shiny tools or look for shiny tools. They look for an integration layer at the end of the day. And I think that's what's going to happen, because ultimately the biggest question that is going to be discussed in 2026, and I'm absolutely certain of this, is where's the source of truth that helps me to make the right strategic decision to operate my business, to manage profitability, margin, and basically churn. And the PMS can't do all of that.
Yeah, that was what I sat in on the panel that you moderated at the DARM conference, the sort of discussing that, right? Of where does the data sit that can sort of speak to all the different tools you have, whether it's in operations, cleanings, maintenance, all the information about your homes. You've got all your employees, you've got the OTAs, you have the bookings, you have the revenue, you have your accounting, you have all the expenses of your business, you have all the expenses that go to the properties. There's all this data that goes into running your platform that lives in all these disparate systems, and none of them are talking to each other. And ultimately, your ability to run your company really efficiently and takes understanding what's happening on the cost side, marrying it with what's happening on the revenue side to ultimately drive better profitability. And if none of those systems talk together, then how can you make that happen? And it seemed to be that you were suggesting that you essentially needed to build your own data platform, or have somewhere where all the data lives, where you own it and where you can make those connections yourself, which ultimately, and as someone that works at a tech company, is like, well, someone should build that, right? Uh, or the PMS should own it, or there's an opportunity there. And so, how do you see operators doing this well, and what do you see as the opportunity that's out there?
I think we're seeing an acceleration in this conversation because of the trends we talked about earlier that we foreseen that are coming into the industry, where this shift to professionalization is not just about growth, and as we said, it's not about scale. It's about profitability. It's about unit economics, understanding profitability on a unit basis. It's about building strong relationship to homeowners that requires different data sets as well, and the operation needs to work cohesively together to be a one ecosystem as a service provider. And I think that's is going to be driven from an inside out point of view, where the maintenance people, I'm exaggerating here a little bit, have no clue what the salespeople are doing, and the salespeople have no clue what the cleaning teams are doing, and the cleaning teams don't know how the schedule is done for the laundry, for example. And then finance is struggling to get receipts from the maintenance guys that is running around and doing maintenance job, and then he forget to file his receipts. And so, and then we have the accounting, then we have tax, then we have tourist tax. So we have so many stakeholders outside the business and inside the business. And I think that cohesive layer of data to share is missing to actually work better together and efficient within the organization, and for the management team to make smart decisions in relation to pricing, in relation to making offers to homeowners. Do we know about the homeowners in terms of unit economics? What are the pain points of the homeowners, in terms of cost of finance, in terms of cost of, amenities or services that they're paying for, electricity, whatever it might be. And I think that there's so much data out there. And in the past, we've been overwhelmed with the data because we have been too busy to execute the operation, the business, because running a property management business is not an easy job. And for anybody who thinks it's an easy job, I would highly recommend not to get into the industry because it's getting more complex as the competition rises for all the points we've just discussed. So I think to your question, there is many different drivers, and I'm not saying ultimately you need to build something on your own. While at the moment that's probably your best solution because there's nothing out there that will provide you the entire source of truth from your entire organization, all the touch points that you have. I have not seen such a platform. And I think that's where an opportunity lies to build something on your own, or somebody will come with that solution to make sure. And I still don't think, even in the future, that the PMS will be able to own the entire source of truth of an operation.
Yeah. You mentioned how hard property management is, and I'm not a property manager. I have one property. I do manage it myself, but it is one, and it is relatively easy. But as you think about how AI is going to impact the property management space, and I'm not sure if you've done this exercise of like, what percent, like, let's say maybe over the next 5-10 year horizon of property management, do you think is going to be taken over by AI? And we could think of it as simply just like the back of the house stuff, like excluding and cleaning and maintenance, or even like, do you think, and we're going to have humanoid robots cleaning these units in 5 years that Tesla produces? What end of the spectrum do you think it sort of lands on in terms of what can be automated?
I mean, I wouldn't even dare to think 10 years from right now. I think we need to wrap our heads around what's happening within the STR industry. And funny enough, I've just ordered the latest book from Zach Cass talking about the renaissance of AI, and I'm going to read that. And I'm not that well prepared for this question, but I think we need to be careful. And I've started to change my mind on that this year to think about the robots won't be here so fast, so it's still going to be a human business. I think I would be very careful to make that statement nowadays on what I have seen just in the last 3 months, seeing what kind of robots also the Chinese are producing. They can do everything. And this is pretty significant. So the biggest question is still the cost of operation. Is it more efficient to do it with human capital versus, this is going to cost a lot of money, but cost of technology is also coming down over time. So I think in 5 years, we probably won't see robots cleaning our properties. But I think in relation to literally 80% of other repetitive workflows, also within the STR industry, that doesn't have particularly a very important human interaction, will be taken over by AI without a doubt. And I'm pretty certain about that.
How much are you using AI in your business now? Is that something that you're able to take advantage of? And do you see it as a thought partner? Like, I'm finding it as something that me and my team are able to leverage pretty substantially. But do you see yourself using it? Do you see property managers using it, and less in a think automated way, but of how to think about how to optimize my business sort of more holistically, in how you might find opportunities for improvement?
You know, One thing, I mean, for me personally, also as a consultant, I mean, AI is a threat. People think, you can replace a consultant with AI, which I would strongly go against because you you can't take the experience and the human aspect of, leadership and management and et cetera away. And I think, but in that sense, AI has helped me to basically use and digitize content that I have produced and my team or our team has produced over the last 7 years at AGL, that we can use AI, and we're more efficient, but we're also a lot deeper in our observations, in our recommendations, because all of a sudden I have the ability to look at my entire database of anything that we have created over the last 7 years, which is a game changer for us. And you remember the days when you remember, yeah, 2 years ago, we had this consulting project. Maybe I need to look up that PowerPoint presentation and see what we have recommended then, right? I mean, you don't have to, then you go and search that somewhere on your Google Drive, and then you find it, and you're excited, and then you need to read this thing from head to start to finish. And then you realize, actually, now this is all in my database. So my brain and the work we as consultants have delivered to our customers is now digitized, and I can be, and my results that I can produce to help our customers, being property management companies or technology company, it has significantly increased because we have now access to everything that we have built on our own with research, with whatever input of human capital, and that has definitely changed. In the short-term rental space, I think one thing that comes to my mind is we still need to. There's a long way to go. This business, also when it comes to tech adoption, it's not where it potentially could be. And interesting enough, to your point, that you and I see each other a lot at conferences, but we also need to remind ourselves at these conferences, we probably see less than 10% of the supply that is actually out there, right? And that's not the benchmark. So just because a super sophisticated technology-driven AI company out of Los Angeles is talking about building an integrated data dashboard doesn't mean the other 99.9% are doing the same. And I think that's where I would urge the people, and also your audience in a way, to say, hey, if you have not started even thinking about it, then do it tomorrow and get yourself familiar. It's a fundamental game changer to the industry, and we need to embrace it. And I think there is still a lot of people that will struggle if they don't adapt to some of these processes, especially also to fight margin. I mean, we haven't talked about what happens if our OTAs are going to raise distribution commission to 25%. We're done, right? Depending on the business model you run. So you're forced to create efficiency, and AI is going to be one of the key drivers to help you with your profitability and efficiency within your business.
That all makes sense. The other big question I get from investors, from the press, is around growth, and whether we're sort of through this growth cycle that we saw during COVID, where listing growth just exploded around the world, profitability, occupancy, and you sort of talked about the sort of normalization that's been happening. Do you see that normalization sort of coming down to this industry is going to be like the hotel industry? It's going to be 2% growth, 3% in ADR growth, and overall industry revenue is going to grow 5%, and that's it? Or do you, and maybe part of that is regulation. It feels like there's so many different dynamics and we could tell the bull case of short-term rental adoption sort of picking back up again, the sort of rise of midterm rentals and sort of this blended lodging option, and that's going to keep this industry growing at 10% a year, or the sort of bear case where regulation kills growth in cities, and the adoption that we saw during COVID sort of pulled forward a whole bunch of demand, and now we're going to go into a more weaker growth story. So where do you sort of sit on that bull bear case in terms of industry growth over the next few years?
To be honest, Jamie, I feel a little bit intimidated, because if I'm being asked that question by Jamie Lane, then it's
well, I don't know how to answer the question, so you're smarter than I am, and I'm hoping to figure out the right answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Since I last saw you, I've quoted you probably about 35 times already with your presentation that you did at DARM, and I think when I saw you presenting, let me start there. My immediate question was, when are we going to see future data that is neutralized by regulation, for example, right? So that's one. Number two, in order to answer that question, and number two, we know this is a hyper-local business, right? So And you're talking to a guy who sits in Switzerland. It's snowing outside right now. So I have a bigger lens on, let's say, the European business. But I've also had the honor to speak in Australia, Latin America, and I've seen different markets. And I think so we need to differentiate when we have this conversation. Which markets? Is it urban? Is it leisure, et cetera, et cetera. Overall, I think my opinion is that we are not going to see the growth rates that we have seen in the past. Number one, that's driven either by, depending on what's happening on a macroeconomic basis by raising capital costs and also regulation. Because one thing that I quote you on is that, for example, Spain's supply has dropped by 6%, and that's significant of a market which is, the second largest European leisure market is Spain next to France, and that dropping by 6%, that's not going to grow, right? And this doesn't mean that the ADRs are going to grow or the RevPARs are going to grow either, because there's different impacts. There's global warming. The summers in Spain are super hot, so people rather go to Scandinavia, to cooler countries, stay domestic in the mountains in Switzerland. Switzerland domestic summer, winter destination in summer, seeing a massive increase of business because people stay at home and going to the mountains where it's cooler than going down to Greece when it's 50 degrees Celsius in summer. So I think we need to differentiate. I think overall, these significant growth, also in acceptance of the vertical, is going to slow down. I remember the days when I was with HomeAway and we did this Focusrite report back 20 years ago, and we said, the acceptance rate of the STR vertical with travelers were around 5% in 2005, right? Like the awareness of the vertical was about 5%. Today it's 80%. So we're not going to get a lot more people who have never rented before to come to our market. So that will also have an impact on demand over time, that the demand is not increasing that much as an alternative. And we all know COVID was an absolute blessing to our industry, where people still wanted to get out of the house and couldn't go to hotels. So the STR place was the perfect alternative. And, I count myself in it. It was Switzerland. We went in summer holidays in Switzerland twice in a destination. My wife has lived here for 20 years. She said, this is a beautiful country. And yes, it is, right? And we're staying in an STR. So I think overall, we are not like if somebody comes in and says, we're projecting a CAGR of the short-term rental industry in North America of 5% over the next 3 years, I wouldn't sign that.
What would you think is a better one?
2%.
2%. Yeah. Do you think the OTAs can change that? So that's the other sort of thought question I have of like marketing dollars and being spent, and Airbnb spends a ton on sort of brand marketing, category awareness. Vrbo has spent historically, and they've got Nick Saban sitting in hot tubs talking about how great it is to have your own vacation rental. And Booking.com now is spending more and more money in the US to make it known that they have vacation rentals and their vacation rentals are an option. And we know that marketing can have a big impact. So how do you see sort of the OTAs sort of fitting into this landscape? We haven't even discussed them, but they do drive maybe I would say a significant part of the narrative around short-term rentals.
Yeah, without a doubt. And they have in the past already as well, right? And again, different, the sheer power that Booking has in Europe versus Airbnb and vice versa. And I always said Booking will not leave the North American market untapped. And we're seeing that happening without a doubt. And I think the big question relates to how is the evolution of AI going to impact the OTAs? And that's where the big debate is happening. Also, just read an article today on FocusWire again, where investors talk about, what is going to happen to the OTAs with AI while travel search is changing. My bet is, and I had the pleasure to have Glenn Fogel on my podcast, and I talked to him. I actually asked an interesting question to him without dropping names, but that was an interesting quote. I said, hey, Glenn, are you in 5 years going to be the only employee at Booking.com?
Yeah.
And he laughed at me and said, yeah, definitely not. And I believe here again, it's the race of the bigger ones that are going to survive, and they will also make sure that their content is visible through different algorithms and AI search, that they still can be the part of the transaction. And they've alluded to it already. They have deals with OpenAI, and that's not gonna. So that means that my view is that this is going to continue. They will still be a very big force to continue help the sector, but it is going to be interesting to see if hotels are building more supply than how the market in STR is growing, which might result into a potential shift as well in how our business is growing. But I think there's still other markets like Southeast Asia, like Latin America, which I see the growth opportunity within the STR space is still significantly higher, if you ask me, than in some of the more mature markets like North America and Europe.
Yeah. So we're coming up on our time, and I really appreciate the time you've shared with us, Simon. One last question, and it's maybe a two-parter, but we'll see how it goes. The audience we have is sort of leans more towards the short-term rental investor side. So those buying homes that maybe they're going to operate themselves or hire a property manager for, and sort of have to deal with the cycle of revenues up, revenues down, and different and real estate cycles of what you have to invest to get in. But ultimately, and they're sort of betting on that, and short-term rentals is going to be a sector that people are going to continue to and use for travel. That and real estate is going to be a asset that's going to continue to improve. And that this industry is going to have sort of staying power. So what are you most optimistic about when you think about the next chapter of this industry? And do you think it's a sector that people should be investing in going forward?
Yeah, I'm very optimistic. I still think it's one of the best alternative in relation to hospitality. We're just seeing different trends: midterm rental, long-term rental, a combinations of flexible living, changing of travel behaviors, etc., etc. But we need to think in our industry a little bit more broader. So STR and midterm, I think the lines are becoming more blurry, also due to regulatory impact as well. I think I still see huge opportunities. I think as the business is maturing, it's becoming more interesting. It's not a race to the bottom, without a doubt. But I think for single investors, I think you would be very smart in building in enough margins when you're doing your calculations, and make sure you're being able to survive more volatility within the market. And we still don't know whatever has been announced by the White House yesterday for institutional owners not to buy single homes. That could potentially impact as well. So at the end of the day, we need to be constant on our toes. We need to happen what happens, and we need to know what's happening in the market. And I think consumption of data is becoming more important than ever before as the industry becomes more professional. But as it becomes more professional, it also is more interesting for investments to manage volatility better and de-risk the investment as well.
Good answer, and thanks for the call out on the data.
Yeah.
And Simon, it's been a pleasure. I'll say your podcast now, STR Global Unlocked, has become a regular for me every week. Every Thursday it comes out.
Tuesday.
I'm listening to the latest episodes. They're incredible. The fact that you're able to get Glenn Fogel on was amazing, and he's such a smart guy in the industry, and I've really been impressed with the podcast and the interviews that you've done, and sort of the light you've shed on different aspects in the overall industry.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jamie. And one of my biggest goals for 2026 is have Brian Jeske on my podcast as well.
I'll put in a good word for you. Well, Simon, if people want to find you, how's best for them to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Best is obviously on LinkedIn, Simon Lehmann, Lehmann. And otherwise, STR Global Unlocked, you can find me as well. And last but not least, my consultancy firm is ajlatelier.com. And that's the best way you can find me.
Well, Simon, thanks for joining.
It's been a great pleasure, Jamie, and have a great 2026.